Good morning. You're listening to National Real Estate Auction Radio Show. I am your host, Doug Dennison, and we are broadcasting from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida, the nation's oldest city, at WFOY 1240 AM. We've got our first caller, so I'm going to go right to it. Good morning. You're on the air.
Doug?
Yes.
It's Jim Wise and Jeff Johnson.
Well, wonderful, and I'm hearing you loud and clear, and that's a great thing. Jeff, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, and yourself?
Well, good. I'm just getting the intros, but I saw your call, and I'm gonna do some of the intros here while you just wait for just a second.
Take your time, Doug. Whatever you want us to do.
Number one, the mission statement for this show is to provide an educational experience for listeners in a promotional format for auctions across the country. Our listeners are real estate agents, real estate media, bankers, bankruptcy attorneys, auctioneers, and most importantly, the general public. And so today we've got Jim Wise and Jeff Johnson, and just a quick deal about Jim and Jeff. I met them, oh my gosh, it was, I guess, October or November. I was up to Washington, D.C., trying to find out about what was happening with the government surplus properties. And this entailed listening to the State of the Union from the President, and him saying that he'd like to try to help balance the budget by selling government surplus properties, and then his follow-up saying that he may have like 14,000 properties that he could sell and save billions of dollars, and that was at the Baltimore State of the Budget Address, which I believe was February 13th, February 14th. And then a follow-up came when I actually saw something on the website that it was an article from thehill.com, which is actually a newspaper and an internet media system, and it says GOP senator to propose auction of federal properties to pay down deficit. This is in August, and it said they're trying to sell up to 45,000, auction up to 45,000 unused or underused government properties. And so I went up to Washington to find out what's happening, and met you guys through a great guy that I've known in the past, Roger Lindbergh. And Roger and I have worked in auctions before. He's a PR guy and a government person that knows the ins and outs, and he introduced me to you guys. Jim, let's start with you first. Tell us what you do and where you're from, and a little bit about your company.
Great, Doug. Thanks. I appreciate that. And I do owe Roger Lindbergh a little debt of gratitude for the introduction to you. It's a real pleasure to meet you and your experience in this area, particularly with the history of the Resolution Trust Corporation. I think is a great asset to this overall policy initiative. I am the managing partner of a Washington-based lobbying firm called Pace Companies. We have been around for a little over 25 years now. It's a bipartisan firm that specializes in a number of policy areas, including energy considerations, transportation considerations, the built environment. Mm-hmm. My background, I cut my teeth on politics in California, working initially for the state controller's office out there on tax policy. We're the chief fiscal officer of the state of California, and increasingly got drawn into the federal government because at that time the fiscal condition of the state, this was in the old Prop 13 days when we were having horrible problems with our revenue flows, and the federal government was short-stopping reimbursement monies due to the state of California, and increasingly kept coming back to California to get taxpayers are share of what was due us, and ultimately just kind of got more drawn into the federal scene, and been here since about 1983.
Okay.
And from that, I had an opportunity to get to know Jeff here, and maybe this would be a great opening over to Jeff.
Yes. And Jeff, are you in North Carolina right now? And Jim, you're in Washington?
I am. I'm actually calling in from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I know our next caller is calling in from the Outer Banks, which is a much prettier area of the state this time of year, but certainly appreciate the opportunity to be on the program here.
Well, tell us about yourself, Jeff.
Of course, I'm Jeff Johnson. I'm Director of Government Affairs for IFMA, the International Facility Management Association. For those who are not familiar with IFMA, it is the largest and most widely recognized professional association for facility managers, representing more than 20,000 members in 78 countries.
Wow.
Our members represented 127 chapters and 16 councils, manage more than 37 billion square feet of commercial space, and annually purchase more than $1 billion in products and services. I've had the good fortune to represent IFMA in Washington, D.C. For almost 5 years now. And our members include both facility managers, architects, engineers, basically all facets of the built environment. So we have a range of issues that we follow in Washington, realignment of federal property being first and foremost.
Well, let's talk about that. And again, I was involved, and thank you for that little help there, Jim. I was involved in actually going to Washington when the RTC, and for those of you who don't know what the RTC was, the Resolution Trust Corporation was put together, I'm going to say 1990, 1991. It was because of the savings and loans that had gone down the tube, and they had to figure out a way how to sell all these assets from all these hundreds of institutions that were locked down and needed to be sold. And so they put together the bill, and it was called FIREA. And the original stages of it, they had talked about auctions, but when the bill came out, it did not include auctions. And so my former boss and I went up to Washington. We had done some FDIC work and had letters of reference, and basically not knowing what we were supposed to be doing, just went door to door to senators and congresspeople and said, you really need to put the words auction into this bill, because this is the fairest and most open and transparent way to get monies back into the system for the government. And a guy named Congressman Doug B. Ryder championed the cause. He said it was a good idea, and he championed the cause, and auction marketing went into the bill, and we had hundreds of auctions that brought in millions and millions of dollars for the taxpayer and the government, and that was a good thing. Now we've got, of course, a different scenario. We've got, we had Peter Monroe, who was the president of the RTC, the president of the Oversight Board, on 2 weeks ago. And Jim and Jeff, I asked him, what kind of, he was so involved in the RTC. I said, how much bigger is this problem compared to the RTC? And he said, about 50 times bigger. And that just floored me, because I had heard people say that it's much larger, it's 10 times more, it's all that kind of stuff. To have a guy that was actually in charge of the RTC at the time say that it was 50 times more is just crazy. And now you've got these government surplus properties that need to be sold. And tell us what's happening right now, and where things are on the Hill, and try to remember that we've got listeners that are general public, and try to tell them how a bill is really done, if you could.
At the risk of being flippant, that could possibly be a real education even for these members of Congress. Jeff, maybe I'll just give a quick update, and then you correct me when I start to lie, because after all, I am a lobbyist.
Sounds good, Jim.
There actually are two approaches to this, and I hope a lot of your listeners may remember from Politics 101. Legislation has to pass both houses of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And those who are smart will try to have comparable, if not identical, legislation that would be introduced in each house, with the idea that once a bill passes each house, if there are to be any differences to be between the two bills, they would be resolved in a conference committee comprised of representatives of both the House and the Senate that would resolve those differences and then report a compromise bill back to each of the respective houses for enactment and then sent up to the president for his signature. And so in that sense, we do have two pieces of legislation that have been introduced in the House and in the Senate, although there are some differences between the two versions, even upon introduction. The House bill got a number of H.R. 1734. It was introduced by Congressman Jeff Denham from California. The Senate version, and I wish I could recall the bill number off the top of my head.
It's 1503, Jim.
S-1503, and that was introduced by Senator Scott Brown of Massachusetts. The House bill, because of the way of the rules of the House, if it affects more than one policy area, it could get referred to more than one committee, and it must be considered and approved by each committee that would have jurisdiction over that policy area. In this instance, there is a committee called Transportation and Infrastructure, and because this bill touches on the infrastructure policy area, it was passed out of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in early October, but it now has a referral to two other committees in the House that has got to get past. A committee called Oversight and Government Reform, which has jurisdiction over some of these public buildings, and through a Rules Committee consideration as well. In the Senate, the bill is a little bit lagging. Upon introduction, was referred to the Environment and Public Works Committee, Public Works being the entity that oversees public buildings on the Senate side, and it is sitting there in committee, and there has been no action on Senator Brown's bill as yet.
Okay.
And that's kind of an update as to where we are with the bills, and I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Jeff.
The only thing that I would address, Jim, is just kind of the scale of the problem that we're trying to address here. And as many people know, the federal government is actually the largest real estate holder in the world, owning and operating more than 500,000 facilities worldwide. And as we talked about, there are excess properties out there, but the bigger problem perhaps is that there are many, many facilities that are underutilized, meaning they're either not entirely full or they only have a couple people working in them, whatever it may be. So any eventual solution to the excess property issue will deal not only with disposal of properties that are in fact excess, but also realignment of the entire federal real estate portfolio. And essentially what that means is making better use of existing space, transitioning from leased spaces into owned spaces, and trying to update the federal real property roles to reflect what the modern workforce looks like. As many of you know, and I think today is a good example, the modern employee doesn't always have to come to the office to do their work because of telecommuting and other benefits of technology. You can call in from anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world and essentially be sitting in the office. So does the federal government really need to maintain all these office buildings when so many employees are working virtually through the technology benefits that have been allowed to them? So that's the consideration moving forward is, one, how do we designate properties as excess, and two, how do we realign the portfolio to make the best use of existing space here? And that's something that the legislation introduced both by Congressman Denham and Senator Brown attempts to address.
Well, let me put it into as an example, and for the taxpayers out there, which you're a taxpayer, I'm a taxpayer, everybody's a taxpayer. There's an article that I'm reading right now from Friday, October 28th. It's about the the bill and the government surplus properties, and quote, it's one property already drawing attention is the old post office annex in Washington, D.C. The facility loses $6 million a year, yet it hasn't been used in 10 years. Congressman Denham says Donald Trump and the Waldorf Astoria have expressed interest in buying the annex to use a commercial venue that creates jobs and actually makes money for the taxpayers. That's just one property, and I know it's a big one, and that's what's put out there. We're not talking just for the listeners here. We're not talking about Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and residences and homes and houses. We're talking about warehouses, office buildings, and land that the government isn't using. And, much to the chagrin of taxpayers, they have no idea how much property is out there that is not being used, and yet they're paying for the upkeep. And just a startling example is the fact that this post office in Washington, D.C. loses $6 million a year. I mean, that's crazy numbers. So it's not just a matter of saving the money by selling these properties and stop having the taxpayers pay these security, electricity, insurance, the cost of vandalism, all that kind of stuff that is happening with buildings that are not being used. It's also, hey, let's sell these properties and let's have some of these dollars go back into the government budget to hopefully balance the budget, because don't they need a little help up there in that regard?
So it would appear, certainly. And Doug, I think you make a great point in that the savings in this bill are really threefold if you look at it in a broader perspective. One, as you mentioned, any revenue that comes from a sale of property will go back into the Treasury and help, reduce any spending shortfalls that we have. The bigger consideration that arises, and this is something that our members engage in on a regular basis, is the avoided operations and maintenance costs over the life of a facility.
Right.
And so if you sell a facility, not only are you getting that immediate revenue back in, but you're also not incurring those maintenance charges for out years for a facility that may not be used at all. So that's a big consideration. I think the third consideration that comes in is the amount of money that the federal government is spending on lease space, while at the same time owning and operating facilities that aren't being utilized.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to get out of some of those expensive leases, particularly in costly markets, that's one other avenue for savings there. And certainly something that both Congressman Denham and Senator Brown had in mind when they introduced their respective legislation.
And Doug, I think Jeff's got some wonderful points here, and I think it would be really critical for us to emphasize one other point. And this, I think, goes to the experience that you certainly had with the old Resolution Trust Corporation methodology, by which these properties were to be disposed of in some type of a prudent, methodical way that ensured highest return for the American taxpayers. It is, in our view, critical that there be the capability of having professional individuals with a proven methodology that it becomes a component of this overall approach to the disposition of this surplus excess federal property. I think would be someone like a lot of the listeners here who are engaged in the professional auction industry and profession that understand how to conduct commercial sales in a highly competitive marketplace with great transparency, because that professional approach using private sector entrepreneurial discipline really, in our view, affords the best return on investment for the American taxpayer. So, it would be our hope, and it is our desire that component of a disposition methodology really be incorporated in this legislation.
Well, as you know, this particular program is the National Real Estate Auction Radio Show. My job is to promote auctions and to educate the people about auctions. But yeah, you're exactly right. And let's go we've got about 2.5 minutes before the break, and I'm hoping you guys are going to stay after the break because I want to talk to you more about, what we can do, what's the next steps, all that kind of stuff. But you talked about the transparency for an auction. Let's imagine if you were in charge, and Jim, we're going to make you the government official. You're in charge of selling this old post office annex, which loses $6 million a year. And you've got, to make it simple, you've got 10 offers. And one of them, and you're working with of course, a big real estate group, which auctioneers do too. Whether it's CB, Grubb & Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, whoever it is, Colliers, and the offers come in, and one is, let's pick a number, $100 million, and we're going to put $1 million down as a deposit, and we need 90 days of due diligence, which means that they want to basically take a free look at the property while it's taken off the market. And then somebody else says, well, I'll give you $110 million, but we're going to need financing, and we need 6 months of due diligence. And by the way, we're only going to give you $500,000 down as a deposit. And if you get the gist, it's not apples to apples, and so you, as the government official, Jim, has to figure out how in the world am I going to, pick one and then stand the onslaught of the other bidders who say, wait a minute, there's some dirty dealings down here. How come they got it? And that's why an auction is important, because everybody is on the same playing field. It's the same deposit. It's the same closing. It's the same amount of due diligence, which is prior to the auction. So I'm going to have to go to a break, but it's about 2 or 3 minutes, guys. I'm so thrilled that you're on. I know it's right before the holidays, and for you to take this time is very special to me and for our listeners. We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to come back, and we've got Jim Wise and Jeff Johnson from the Washington area talking to us about this government surplus properties issue. And again, guys, we'll be back in about 3 minutes.
Great.
Come on out to the St. Augustine and St. Johns County Flea Market where the fun begins. There's old, new, and unique items every weekend. Bargain basement prices and something for everyone. Just in time for Christmas shopping. There's a great farmer's market and Charlie's Famous Barbecue. You haven't had barbecue until you try Charlie's, and you won't find better baked beans. Churches and charities get a free booth 2 days each month. Business owner display 50% off rental prices. RV parking and outside storage, the best prices in the Tri-County area. Second month free on outside storage. Every Saturday and Sunday, the St. Johns County Flea Market is open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. State Road 207 and I-95.
Licensed by the state as a skilled nursing facility and certified for a broad range of payer types, the Ponce Therapy Care Center's team of professionals is committed to providing the best nursing care and rehabilitation services. Choosing a skilled nursing facility for a loved one is always a difficult decision. At the Ponce Therapy Care Center, our admissions and social service staff assist you in making an informed, caring decision. We provide information about our facility, determine your payment options, and strategize about your loved one's regimen of care, length of stay, and expected discharge to home. At the Ponce Therapy Care Center, we are proud that over 90% of those admitted to our rehabilitation program successfully return to home. In an industry that is often seen as the final alternative, our goal is to become your first option and facility of choice for skilled nursing and rehab services. The Ponce Therapy Care Center is located at 1999 Old Moultrie Road. Call us at 824-3311 or visit us online at poncecarecenter.com.
Letting Bo Bozard and Jeff King talk about the latest going on at Bozard Ford.
We just had the best month we've ever had.
Yeah, absolutely. Our sales numbers were 20%.
Abilene Restaurant in the Hilton Historic Bayfront again presents its traditional Christmas buffet from noon to 6 p.m. for your dining pleasure. Feast on all the traditional dishes, including a new array of holiday desserts for only $39.95. Special pricing is available for seniors and children. Make Christmas Day a day of leisure for the whole family and have a true day of family togetherness and celebration. Reservations are recommended, and as always, parking is free while dining at Abilene's. Call 904-829-2277 for reservations.
MarkNet Alliance is a national, membership-based network of 41 auction companies. Our companies are successful auction professionals with proven track records and thriving businesses. The MarkNet companies have a staff of over 540 employees who are working hard every day to meet the goals of their clients during our ever-changing economy. MarkNet companies are able to achieve these goals through cutting-edge technologies and ever-growing investor pools. To view the hundreds of auctions currently being conducted, or for more information, visit marknetalliance.com.
And then,
we are back. This is the National Real Estate Auction Radio Show. We have two wonderful guests today. It is Jim Lyons from PACE LLP and Jeff Johnson from the International Facility Management Association, both from Washington, D.C. We're talking about the government surplus properties, and they've been on for about 20 minutes trying to educate me and basically our listeners on how we can move this forward, because, guys, it seems on the surface, the president is for it, the senators are for it, I'm not sure about the senators yet, the House is for it, the is going to be for it because it's going to save money for us. The key is, how do we move this forward?
Well, Doug, just before the break, you posed a good question, and
okay.
Let me get into maybe some of the strategies for how we move this forward by first saying that if we're sitting up there representing the American taxpayers with the General Services Administration, which would be the federal agency that would oversee a good deal of this program,
yeah.
I just want to say that there is great expertise, and there's some individuals within the General Services Administration who are very concerned about this issue and this process, and grasp the importance and the value of this legislation. And I can speak to one very creative, very innovative official over there named Kevin Kamsher, who's done, in our view, an outstanding job for the American taxpayers. But I think what we would envision here would be a need for a public-private sector initiative that would, again, bring in the expertise of the private sector, the creativity of the private sector, to know how, for example, to stage fully transparent auctions of property, but to do so that we're not going to put a glut of properties onto the market at the same time that would have the impact of artificially depressing the relative fair market value of those properties. And I think somebody with experience advising the GSA and maybe even working hand-in-hand with the GSA to run these, such as a lot of your listeners today, I think is a prudent component of the legislation, because I think we're going to require that type of effort and initiative from the private sector to help get this legislation out of the House and the Senate. Jeff, I don't know if there's a point you want to make on this one.
Well, Jim, I think there are two considerations, and you touched on one of them. First is getting the bill passed. We've obviously seen it get through at least one committee on the House side. It's through the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, but as you mentioned earlier in the program, there was a sequential referral which will require it to go to government reform, as well as potentially to the House Rules Committee. So the path to passage on the House side is a little complicated, and hopefully someone with Congressman Denham's relationship and expertise will be able to work through that. The bigger consideration that arises is how do you get this moving on the Senate side? Right now, we have a bill sponsored by Senator Brown from Massachusetts, unfortunately without any bipartisan support. There are no additional co-sponsors on that legislation as of yet. And this is where some of those political considerations come to play. And, of course, Scott Brown, being in the former Ted Kennedy seat up in Massachusetts, is seen as a little bit of a political pariah,
sure,
and that no one wants to work with him in an election year. And there's actually been some articles and roll call in the Washington Post, detailing what a great solution this is. But the reality is that it's election year politics, and sometimes bipartisan compromise is a little bit difficult. So I think that's the first consideration, is one, ultimately how do we get this piece of legislation passed? The second one that arises is how do you influence the legislation during the process so that it really does incorporate industry best practices, including those being utilized by NAA and its members. And so I think that's the second part of this conversation.
NAA, you mean the National Auctioneers Association?
Yes,
Yes.
that's exactly correct. So that's the second consideration here. And given the time frame that we're through the first session of the 112th Congress, basically we have essentially 8 months to work this thing through passage and get it signed. It is an expedited timetable, certainly, and an election year just complicates that process. But, Doug, as you mentioned, it is supported in the House and the Senate and by the administration. So you would think it would be one of those common sense solutions that could get through both chambers and signed into law by the president.
What is happening on the president's side? Because I know he has his own task force and group that are saying, hey, we got to do this, and here's my plan. How does that work with Denham's bill and Senator Brown's bill? How does that kind of weave in and out of how a bill gets passed?
Well, let me take the first crack at that. Among the benefits of the Senator Brown approach or the Congressman Denham approach is you are afforded some waivers or some exemptions from treatment of federal property that are otherwise subsumed in federal statute. For example, a need to first offer property to under the McKinney Act, for example, to local entities for homeless shelters, or to local governments for reutilization. Oftentimes, that is just unnecessary, and yet that is an obligation that exists under the statute. The legislation that's being considered by Congress would afford an opportunity to provide waivers from all of those requirements, something that the president would probably not be able to do just by executive action. So it really does underscore the need for legislation here. I'd also point out real quickly, and Jeff is exactly right, I think we've got a real political stumbling block on the Senate side just because of election year politics that will now really become acute. But you've got great expertise in a bipartisan manner that exists already in the Senate of individuals who recognize the need to have federal buildings, the buildings themselves, run as efficiently as they possibly can, and have sponsored legislation last year that essentially said, if you're going to run a federal building, we're going to make sure that you've trained how to run that building. And the wisdom of that was because of the recognition that at some point we're going to dispose of that property, and if the building is maintained and operated into the industry best practices, when we sell the building, it's going to be a better rate of return for the American taxpayers. That expertise already exists in the Senate. In our view, that's got to be brought into this discussion, and those senators need to be brought into a leadership role on this piece of legislation.
Well,
and Jim, I think that's an excellent point. I think there's a large and ever-growing number of members in both chambers who understand the issues that affect real property and, more importantly, the need to implement industry best practices in federal facilities. I think the Federal Buildings Personnel Training Act, which you referenced, is a great example of kind of those bipartisan common sense solutions that we need to see more of. And I think the core of the legislation that we're discussing here in terms of civilian property realignment is another one of those common sense best practices that can be supported in both chambers by the members who do understand these issues and understand how implementing best practices will not only improve building performance in the short run, but also preserve asset value in the long run and through ultimate disposition. So two important considerations that I think everyone can agree on. As in all things, the devil's in the details.
Well, of course, and this bill that Congressman Denham, who has a lot of co-sponsors, and I don't know the number, but I think it's 30 or 40 and it's
31.
Okay, 31, and it's bipartisan and Republicans, which is always a good thing. But this bill is based on a similar deal that we did many years ago, which was the Base Realignment Act, which was they were trying to close down bases that were no longer being used, and they did it quite effectively. However, I think it's a different plan now, in the fact that most of these bases, whatever it was, 15 years ago or when this took place, happened by basically giving the property away. And that's to other municipalities. It was to nonprofits. There were 2 properties that were sold, and they did great. You know, there was one, and I'm going to say it was for like $730 million. It was in California. And then there was another one that was in California, too, and that was like $432 million. So you can see that this kind of sale brings in some serious money that could help us. But now we're at a place that, you know, we just can't give away the properties because the country needs that income. It just can't be a here, you know, city, you take it because you'll turn it into a park. And again, this is my opinion, but we need some serious help as far as, you know, income generation. You guys agree?
And Doug, I think you make an excellent point there, and there's almost an inherent conflict of interest in that, you know, a member of Congress
yes.
is inclined to deliver federal property to their district for a park or a state building or you know, homeless shelter or whatever it may be. The trouble that arises is that you want to do that at the lowest cost possible. So while you are providing a benefit to whatever congressional district or state that may be, you're ultimately doing a disservice to the other American taxpayers who aren't realizing a return on the investment they made in that property. So I think the best way to, you know, kind of thread that needle is to make sure that this property is disposed of by an independent commission and, you know, done through, you know, the most transparent process, which, as you mentioned, is a public sale, which does utilize, or I should say highlight, the true market value of that property. So I think that's, you know, kind of underscores the need for this type of methodology. And I would just point out in the committee markup that we saw on the House side that Congressman Denham was running, when they started talking about specific federal properties, the number of members of Congress who came in to defend the property in their district, I think, was very telling as to why this process needs to be done by an independent commission.
I would just quickly point out one other issue, and that is if you provide the property to a local government, all you've done is you've transferred the operating expenses to another governmental entity, but you haven't addressed the underlying fact that it is still a cost to the taxpayer, albeit in this instance it may be at a local level.
Well, you're exactly right, and 2 issues here. Number one, you need to sell it, but it concerns me a great deal as a taxpayer that a senator, a congressman could say, hey, yeah, it's a great idea, but you're not getting this property because this is in my district. And that is just, I mean, it's great, just like you said, for the local district that someone handed them, you know, multi-million-dollar piece of land for nothing. But what about the rest of the country? I mean, isn't a senator in a Congress person, I mean, they're there for the whole United States, not just for their individual area. So if I am the American taxpayer and I see a senator or a congressman out there saying, oh, no, you can't take my property, you know, I'm really upset, and I would start pointing fingers.
Well,
am I just too far out there? That I don't know the ins and outs of politics, obviously.
Well, you're right. I mean, and ultimately, to paraphrase Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House, all politics is local. But you are correct that the way that you ensure that there is a nationwide constituency is through the BRAC process. Meaning that it is a up or down vote on the totality of the portfolio, and the ability to pick out specific properties becomes very, very difficult because the standards that are subsumed within the bill are such that you've really got to be able to justify it from a cost perspective why this property should not be exempt from the civilian realignment process.
Well, it's a strange deal when a congressman or senator can say, "Hey, forget the rest of the country. I want this property from my area, and too bad for the rest of the country." That's just not good. Tell us, because we're running out of time, and you guys have been so good. Tell us how we can reach you, Jim. Why don't you go first, because you're obviously well versed in the Washington area. You're a lobbyist. You do a great job. Been there for a long time. How do people reach you?
Email's great. JWise, that's JWISE at Pace LLP. That's PACELLP.com. The website www.pacellp.com. You catch us up there.
Okay.
And happy to respond to anybody who's listening today.
Well, I thank you, Jeff. How about people reaching you?
The best way for me is email as well. It's Jeffrey, JEFFREY .Johnson, JOHNSON at ifma.org. And if you would like more information about IFMA, the website is www.ifma.org. And in closing, I would just say, Doug, I think you're right. This is a great opportunity to pass some good policy here in Washington. It's just now important that everybody out there listening becomes engaged to the extent they're able to, and really voices their support for this methodology.
I thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. You have a great holiday and a great weekend.
Happy holidays, Doug, to you and your listeners.
You bet.
Thank you, Doug. Take care.
Bye-bye now. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, Doug. It's Walter House.
Walter,
House Auction Company.
thank you so much for calling in, and I had you on hold there for a while, and I apologize. We were talking to two people from Washington, D.C. about the government surplus properties and how they should be sold and how they should be auctioned, and the importance of transparency and the importance to get rid of government surplus properties that are costing the American taxpayer. So I'll get off my high horse for just a second. Tell us about yourself, Walter, and where are you from?
Well, I'm the president of House Auction Company. We're a real estate auction firm located, we're headquartered in eastern North Carolina, and licensed brokers and auctioneers now pretty much throughout the Southeast. And as a member of the MarkNet Alliance, we have licensed affiliates in virtually all 50 states. Selling real estate at auction is our core specialty. We occasionally do other types of auctions, particularly if there's real estate involved. But all types of real estate we sell: land, estates, farms, acreage, waterfront property, residential property. Sell quite a bit of waterfront property being located here in eastern North Carolina.
Well, that's great. And you said you're part of MarkNet Alliance?
Yes. Our firm joined the MarkNet Alliance several years ago. As you may know, MarkNet Alliance is an alliance of about 43 companies across the United States that joined this national alliance. These were all companies who've been well established with proven track records, and by forming this alliance, we were able to develop some marketing resources for all the member companies that are really unmatched anywhere else in the auction industry. One of those would be a proprietary project management software available to all MarkNet members. It's a real streamlined, efficient system of managing any and all your auction projects with timelines and projections. And also another feature of the MarkNet Alliance software is the extensive, comprehensive reporting capabilities that we can track the progress of any auction marketing campaign that we're conducting, and even have a feature whereby our sellers, our clients, can actually log in and go to the backside of their auction project and view live time the progress of any auction marketing, the type of response and from where it's coming from, calls and interest that's going on with their particular auction project. So clients, particularly financial institutions or clients with multiple properties that want to see how their project is going, they can actually log into the backside of our website. We give them the secure access to do that for their project only, and they like that. They can get a report and update in addition to what we give them as a routine procedure.
Well, whether you're a private seller or a bank or a government agency, you as a seller need to know, as you say, real time, what kind of interest is happening on your auction, and how many bidders are you going to expect, and how many people have logged on. And all of this is of course, changed since the internet. It's been a wonderful thing. We used to do it with faxes, and we used to do it with telephone calls, but it seems like now everybody just goes on the website, downloads the information, and MarkNet Alliance, because of all the number of auctions that they have, has turned out to be a go-to site for the real estate investor and the real estate bidder, because there's hundreds of auctions on any given day. I mean, I've seen it, 200, 300, and during the summer, I saw it where there was more than 1,000 auctions on that particular day on the MarkNetAlliance.com website, which has got to be a great deal of support for a firm like yours.
It most definitely is. And just one little specific example, we sold numerous tracts of land outside of Newbern, North Carolina, back in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Did an online-only auction, and with the MarkNet Alliance membership, we have the capability of putting our auctions on multiple members' websites. Not only our website, but websites throughout the country at no expense to our seller, which gives them just so much more exposure. And one of our successful bidders was a follower of the MarkNet Alliance, a real estate investor out of Georgia. There was just a plethora of information about the property, aerial photos, plats, records, public records, deeds, so forth. And this investor from Georgia was a high bidder on one of the tracts of land. We obviously, and not only that, but he bid on quite a few of the other tracts in the same auction. And clearly, we would have never gotten this strong bidder without the MarkNet Alliance advantage that we're able to offer our clients. So it's been a real win-win. The MarkNet Alliance has been a win-win deal for us and for our clients. By just giving them exposure in the marketplace, they wouldn't have gotten anywhere else. We're just real pleased to be members. Interesting piece of data. Of course, we track our visitors to our website.
Right.
And last year, the MarkNet Alliance members' websites collectively were receiving an average of 350,000 absolute unique visitors each month. That's not page visits. That's 350,000 separate people collectively went to a MarkNet member's website each month. And the gross sales for last year, successfully sold and closed auctions, predominantly real estate, was over, for the members collectively, was over $500 million.
Wow.
So it's just a strong resource for our clients. The buyers like it. Another big MarkNet advantage is the online bidding platform. We've used a number, the members have, and our firm has, a number of other bidding platforms. Clearly, the MarkNet Alliance bidding platform seems to be the most user-friendly. Almost without exception, our clients really prefer it. easy to log into, easy to use, easy to navigate. And of course, when you're doing an online auction, you're simply opening up your bidder potential not only to the all of North America, but really the entire world.
It is amazing in this world we live in today, where you sell a piece of property in North Carolina and you look at the information that MarkNet provides you and find out that you've got an interested party from Brazil, and you've got another one from England, and another one from Japan, and so on and so on. That is pretty cool.
It is. As I stated, we're primarily a real estate auction firm. We have developed a specialty niche in the sale of vintage and high-quality firearms, and we conducted a online-only firearms auction of about 240 antique firearms, some really old and rare pieces, predominantly they were pre-1898, all came from one collection that a collector commissioned us to sell. And in that one auction, by using the online platform, we had 498 registered bidders from 45 different states.
Wow.
And, clearly we wouldn't have been able to get that with just an on-site auction. So it's been a real win-win situation for us and our clients.
Walter, thank you so much for calling. I need to know, how do people get a hold of you, because we've got about 30 seconds before we have to leave our listeners.
Our website is houseauctioncompany.com. So all the words are spelled out. House, of course, www. But house, like my name, the house you live in, auction, and then the word company, spelled out, .com. Houseauctioncompany.com, and our telephone number is 252-729-1162.
Walter, thank you so much for calling in. Happy holidays. You have a great holiday season.
Merry Christmas to you as well, all your listeners.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, listeners. Again, have a great holiday season. We thank you for listening. And again, have a great weekend and happy holiday season.